Jen was your typical high school senior, navigating the choppy waters of adolescence with all the grace of a baby giraffe on ice skates. While her peers seemed to effortlessly glide through the intricacies of teenage romance, Jen found herself stumbling over her own 2 feet whenever the opposite sex entered the equation. Her best friend, Manolin, had tried her hand at playing Cupid, but Jen's social awkwardness acted as a force field against potential suitors, repelling them faster than a bad pickup line. Then, like a plot twist straight out of a teen flick, Jen's mundane existence took an unexpected turn. Nestled among the chaos of textbooks and forgotten assignments, she unearthed a love letter tucked into the depths of her locker. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning as Jen absorbed the words scrawled across the page. Someone, somewhere, actually liked her. From that day forward, Jen found herself enveloped in a whirlwind of romance, each love letter more heartfelt and enchanting than the last. It was a tale ripped from the pages of a Nicholas Sparks novel, and Jen was the star of the show, basking in the glow of newfound adoration. But as the days wore on, the sweetness of her secret admirer's affections soured into something altogether more sinister. What began as innocent admiration soon morphed into a chilling obsession, as the love letters became increasingly detailed, recounting moments from Jen's daily life with an eerie precision that sent shivers down her spine. Then came the photograph, a snapshot capturing Jen in the most intimate of settings, standing outside her own home. It was a violation of privacy, a stark reminder that her admirer's infatuation had crossed the line into something altogether more dangerous. With each passing day, Jen felt the weight of her stalker's presence bearing down upon her like a leaden cloak. Shadows danced at the periphery of her vision, whispers of unease echoing in the hollow chambers of her mind. The once familiar halls of Silverwood High became a labyrinth of uncertainty, each corner hiding a potential threat. And then came the night, a night etched in the annals of Jen's memory as a harrowing descent into darkness. With the weight of impending deadlines pressing down upon her, Jen found herself ensnared in the web of her stalker's twisted obsession, his presence looming like a specter in the shadows. He was no student, that much was clear. His eyes, dark and feral, bore into her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. With a grip like iron, he seized Jen by the wrist, dragging her into the abyss with a force that left her reeling. For Jen, the world narrowed to a single primal instinct: survival. She fought tooth and nail, clawing desperately against the suffocating darkness that threatened to consume her whole. But her efforts were futile, her struggles mere whispers in the cacophony of chaos that surrounded her. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, salvation arrived in the form of her steadfast friend, Manolin. With the courage of a warrior and the determination of a lioness protecting her cub, Manolin sprang into action, rallying to Jen's aid with a ferocity that banished the darkness and bathed the world in light once more. In the aftermath of her ordeal, Jen found solace in the arms of her loved ones. The trauma of her experience serving as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. With the unwavering support of her family and friends, she emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. As for her stalker, he faded into the obscurity from whence he came, his twisted obsession extinguished by the light of justice. And though the scars of her ordeal would linger, Jen refused to be defined by the darkness that once threatened to consume her. In the end, she emerged victorious, a beacon of hope in a world fraught with shadows. Dan was the kind of guy who seemed to blend into the background effortlessly. He wasn't the type to stand out in a crowd, nor did he want to. High school was supposed to be the time of his life, but for Dan, it was more like a daily struggle to survive. He had his reasons, of course. Being the target of bullies like James and his gang wasn't exactly a recipe for making friends. Every day seemed like a repeat of the last: taunts, jeers, and sometimes even physical violence. Dan was their punching bag, and they made sure he knew it. But Dan wasn't one to dwell on his misfortunes. He kept his head down, buried himself in his studies, and tried his best to ignore the torment around him. It wasn't easy, but he managed. Then came the day when rumors started swirling around the school about James's friends dropping out one by one. Accidents, they said. Strange accidents that left the school buzzing with speculation. Some whispered about karma catching up to them, while others entertained the idea of something more sinister lurking in the shadows. Dan heard the gossip, but he paid it little mind. After all, he had enough on his plate just trying to survive each day. But then, one fateful morning, as James made his way to school, something unexpected happened. A blow to the head, darkness, and then the sensation of being bound and gagged in a cold, dark room. It was like something out of a nightmare. When James regained consciousness, he found himself face to face with a figure cloaked in shadows. Fear gripped him as the light revealed the twisted smile of his captor. What followed was a descent into madness, torture, agony, and the relentless pursuit of suffering. James begged, pleaded, but his cries fell on deaf ears. It was a nightmare from which there seemed to be no waking. And then, mercifully, darkness claimed him once more. When James finally awoke, it was to the sterile walls of a hospital room and the worried faces of his family. They asked questions, demanded answers, but James couldn't bring himself to speak. The terror still clung to him like a shroud, rendering him mute. In the end, he was forced to leave school, his reign of terror cut short by forces beyond his control. It was a relief to some, a cause for celebration even, but for Dan, it was just another chapter in a life defined by fear and isolation. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal for everyone except Dan. The shadows that had haunted him seemed to linger, casting a pall over his every waking moment. Mario, a classmate who had begun to see past Dan's walls, couldn't ignore the change in his friend. Concerned, he followed Dan one afternoon, only to stumble upon a scene straight out of a horror movie. There was Dan standing over a bloodied figure, his hands clutching a knife, as if in a trance. Shock turned to horror as Mario realized the truth. Dan wasn't alone in his own mind. In the quiet of that abandoned room, Dan confessed to his friend the truth that had haunted him for so long. Dissociative identity disorder, they called it. A fractured mind torn between light and darkness. For Dan, it was a burden too heavy to bear alone. But with Mario by his side, he found a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Together, they would face the demons that lurked within, armed with nothing but friendship and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And as they stood there, two souls bound by the ties of friendship, Dan knew that no matter how dark the night may seem, there would always be someone to light the way. Late nights at school were nothing out of the ordinary for me. With exams looming ahead, I often found myself buried in textbooks long after the last bell had rung and the halls had emptied. But this particular night was different, unnervingly so. I was hunched over my desk in the dimly lit library, the only source of light coming from the flickering fluorescent bulbs above. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers or the soft tap of my pen against the desk. The weight of exhaustion hung heavy on my shoulders, but I pushed through, determined to conquer the impending exams. As the hours wore on, fatigue began to blur the lines between reality and delirium. That's when I first heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I imagined it? But then it came again, clearer this time, like a soft breath against my ear. I glanced around, searching for the source of the sound, but the library remained empty, save for me. I tried to convince myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, but the hairs on the back of my neck refused to lie flat. Curiosity getting the best of me, I rose from my seat and ventured out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The school seemed to loom around me, its corridors stretching out like darkened veins. The whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each step I took. They seemed to be calling out to me, beckoning me closer. Against my better judgment, I followed their eerie melody, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The whispers led me to the locked classrooms, their doors looming ominously in the darkness. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch the nearest door, like the metal cool against my fingertips. With a creak, it swung open, revealing nothing but rows of empty desks and chairs. But the whispers, they were louder now, swirling around me like a sinister melody. I stepped into the classroom, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, a figure lurking in the shadows, its features shrouded in darkness. Panic seized me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a discarded backpack. The figure advanced, its movements slow and deliberate. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape the confines of the classroom. But no matter how fast I ran, the whispers followed, their chilling refrain echoing through the empty corridors. I felt like a trapped animal, cornered with nowhere to hide. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat, every whisper a harbinger of doom. As I rounded a corner, I collided with something solid, a wall of darkness that seemed to swallow me whole. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The figure, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, its features twisted into a grotesque mask of madness. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot as the figure drew closer, its breath hot against my skin. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lunged forward, its hands outstretched like claws. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable impact, but it never came. Instead, I felt a rush of cold air followed by a deafening silence. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone, vanished into the shadows like a specter of the night. Trembling, I stumbled out of the school and into the cool night air, my heart still racing in my chest. The whispers had faded, replaced by the distant hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. But the memory of that night, the chilling whispers, the lurking figure, would haunt me for years to come. And as I looked back at the darkened school, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent still lurked within its walls, waiting to claim its next victim.